So the last couple of times we met, we talked about, one, I've already showed you the parts of a soundboard, and then we talked about the preamp settings on how to set your gain, and then how to set what an attenuator does and how to set it. Okay, and so today what I want to talk about is volume control. Okay, because that's going to be quite a bit of what you do on the board in a mix. Okay, and so first of all, whenever you're in practice, okay, you should show up to practice and you do your sound checks. Okay, as you're doing your sound checks, that's the time to set your gain and your attenuator, and then try to bring your faders up to unity. Bring your faders up to unity. Okay, and once you finish the sound checks, okay, as they are practicing, that's when you kind of listen. You listen to the vocals, you listen to the instruments, and this is where you have to sort of train yourself to start hearing what a specific instrument sounds like. Okay, what does a guitar sound like? What does a piano sound like? What does the keyboard sound like? Okay, so that when they're all playing at the same time, you got to train your ears to pick out that specific sound out of the entire mix. Okay, and that takes practice. It's not an overnight thing. It does take practice to kind of like, oh, I want to hear, do I hear the guitar? Do I hear, the piano, the keyboard? Do I hear all, 4 of the vocals? Okay, that sort of thing. Okay, and there are ways to kind of help you pick that up. So a lot of times what I do is right when they're in practice, just so that I remember what certain people sound like or certain instruments sound like, I'll solo a channel out, and then take the ears, my ears up, and then listen to it through the board, and I can solo just that channel out. Okay, just to make sure I know what that person sound like versus the next person, because you might have 3 female vocalists and they kind of sound similar out in the mix. Okay, but you want to know exactly what that first vocalist sounds like. Okay, so that when you're listening in the house, you can raise and lower the volume of that one person. Okay, so the next session we'll talk about how to blend all of that. Okay, today all I want to talk about is sort of volume control. Okay, we've already set the gain. What should the volume be? Okay, and it's different depending on the venue. If you're setting up for like a concert, then you're going to set up a much higher sounding, a louder sounding mix. Okay, you're setting up for a church service, and it depends. Is it a youth service or a service with more elderly people there? Okay, because it changes what you want to do. So, for example, the human ear picks up a certain frequency better than others. Okay, so in the 1 to 4 kilohertz range, and we'll explain that as we get to EQing and stuff like that. In the 1 to 4 kilohertz range, it's in the mid-high range. That's the ears pick that up really well, and then sort of the older you get, the more sensitive your ears become to that range. So if you peak at that range, it becomes really sharp, and sometimes to some of the elderly people, that's just right out uncomfortable. Okay, and then for the younger generation, oh yeah, that's fine. Okay, so you got to know your audience too. Okay, so I always recommend having a decibel reader. I have one on my iPhone, but I can't show it to you right now because that's what's being used to record me. Okay, so but you guys have already seen me use it. Okay, and mine is a spectral analyzer, sound analyzer, and a decibel reader. Okay, so it breaks down, the spectrum analyzer breaks down the sound into its frequency, and I can see each of the frequency move up and down. Okay, the decibel reader reads the volume, the amount of volume that is in the house. Now, when you go buy a decibel reader, you can get some pretty cheap ones at Radio Shack and stuff like that, or like on my iPhone, I paid a couple bucks and I got an app. Okay, now most of the apps on the phones aren't great. Okay, there is one that was adjustable and I was able to calibrate it with a $300 decibel reader. Okay, so and spectral analyzer. So it's, you know, I've got it down well. Okay, but most of the other apps aren't very accurate. Okay, in fact, a cheap one from Radio Shack is probably better than 95% of the apps you can find out there. Okay, so but I do have one app that I like, but I'm not going to say it because I don't want to record it. Okay, but if you want to know what it is, just email me and I can tell you what I use. Okay, and how to calibrate it. Okay, now when you talk about decibel readers, a couple of things you have to realize that they are weighted. Okay, something called weighting. Okay, so there's A weight and there's C weight. Okay, most people that use decibel readers don't understand that. Okay, C weighting is for music. Okay, like a band or something like that. A weighting is for just someone speaking. Okay, and that changes the way the decibel reader gives you the readout. Okay, so so for what we use here in our venue, we use C weighting. Okay, and once we C weight it, then they'll give us a pretty accurate read. Okay, so for our youth service, our chapel service here, since it's mostly high schoolers, I like to run it, you know, somewhere around 90 decibel in the house. Okay, 85 to 90. I wouldn't go much past 93 in here. Okay, but I do like run. If I'm running for like a church service, then I'll try to keep it around 85 decibels, somewhere around there. Okay. Again, it just depends on your venue and what it sounds like to you. Okay, so I threw a CD in here, like I normally do. Okay, so when you set up for practice, okay, and you've gone through all the instruments and that sort of thing, what you want to do is kind of get the volume. You know, you set your gain. Once you set your gain, don't change it. It's really a bad thing to try to start changing it live, because that's when you're going to overdo it and have feedback and whatnot. Okay, so most of what you're going to do is down on the fader level. Okay, so if you set it at unity, where the volume's at unity, okay, and I think this is about 80 decibels, 75, 80 decibels. Okay, I think that's what I set it, about 80 decibels when I did this. Okay, and so you have to understand how sound works. Okay, so the physics of sound is you're going to be getting sound off the stage there, and you're going to set your volumes and everything and all the different instruments so you can all hear all of them in your mix. Okay, and the overall volume should, you know, let's say 88 decibels. We set it at an average of 88 decibels. Okay, again, it's when it, you know, when you're talking about decibel readers, other things to talk about is, are you just looking at the average, or are you looking at the peaks, or whatnot? Okay, so let's say we want to average around 88 decibels, peaking at 92 decibels, something like that. Okay, so once we got that range in here, there's a couple of things you got to understand. First of all, the room itself. Okay, does it have things that absorb sound? So if you look around this room, you notice that this room has, up on the ceilings, they have these panels. And those are sound absorbing panels. Okay, the original design was not to have those panels. But the sound department at this church said that you have to have those panels. Otherwise, the sound will go up and then bounce off the ceiling. Okay, reverberate off the ceiling. Now, it would have been ideal if that was completely enclosed. Okay, but for aesthetic reasons, they wanted it, and unfortunately that causes sound to reverberate up above the baffles there. Okay, so that's why sometimes when someone's talking, you hear that kind of echoey sound, and you just can't EQ that out, and it's because it's coming off the ceiling. Okay, other thing is, you notice on the sides of the walls is you got these sound panels. Okay, those are designed to absorb sound, so it's not bouncing off the walls so much. Okay, the other thing is, look at just where we're at. Sound comes into this area and it just bounces off the walls here, okay, in this area, okay? And then so what you hear in here, in your sound booth, is actually very different than what you hear out in the middle of the audience, okay? And so you have to take all those things into consideration. Then you set your volume. You take your decibel reader, you set your volume to a point where you think it's good and comfortable for you and your audience. Okay? And then that's during practice. Okay? Then the house fills up with people. As soon as you get a bunch of bodies in here, guess what? Your sound drops, depending on how many people you have in there, because each one of these people absorbs sound. So by the time you get a full house of people and the sound going from the front of the venue to where you're at, you've completely absorbed a lot of the sound. So in practice, I'll tend to adjust my volume about 3 to 5 decibels higher than what I'm comfortable with, knowing that by the time the house fills, the volume's going to come down. Okay? Or you can wait until the house fills and then adjust the volume at that point. Okay? So that's kind of how volume control. So once you get the house filled with people, you've already practiced everything. Okay? You'll sit there and generally there's not a whole lot you need to do. You bring your faders up until you get the right volume level you want. And I like us to ride the faders. Okay, so that just ride. There's some people out there that says don't ride the faders. Once you set it, it's okay. I like to ride the faders because sometimes the musicians, when they're singing, they'll back off the mic. They'll get into the spirit and they'll back off the mic, and then all of a sudden their volume drops. Okay, and then so you have to kind of bring up the volume a little. Sometimes they get really excited and they're really into that mic. Okay, and then you need to back them off. Okay, sometimes the other instruments drop in volume and you got a vocalist who forgets this is a volume point where they're supposed to drop in volume, and all of a sudden you got this really loud person out there. Okay, so again, you bring it down. What should be the blend? Okay, the simple thing is if you got your instrument volume at whatever level here, let's say whatever this level is here, your vocalist should be, when you're out in the middle audience, your vocalist should be just a few decibels above. They want 2 decibels above, just a notch above the instruments there, and that's kind of a good mix. Okay, back here, because sound kind of reverberates a little, okay, and we lose a lot of the sound. It tends to be, the funny thing is, in back here, it tends to be actually not as loud as out there. So I've discovered that if you just do it a notch above in here, it's really loud out there. Okay, so I kind of bring it to almost it's a hair above the instruments, or almost even equal with the instruments. Again, then when you go out to the audience, then it seems to sound right. Okay, then you ride the faders in terms of the vocalist versus the instruments, and you keep it kind of, in that sync. So if the instruments drop, you should pull the vocalist down if they don't do it themselves. Okay, and that's why it's important to go to the practices and hear what kind of songs, and get to know the songs. Okay, so when I mix at my church, I'll get a list of the songs that they play, and if I don't already have it on my iPhone, I'll go out and buy it and then listen to it throughout the week there, just so I know what it's supposed to sound like. Okay, the last time we mixed for that concert, where the other student mixed for that concert a week ago here in this venue. Okay, I happen to have her CDs from before, so I loaded them up on my iPhone and listened to it for the whole week. Okay, just so that I know what that concert singer sounds like. Okay, what kind of songs they sing, what kind of beat they like. Okay, and that kind of thing. So once you get that, then then what's the interesting thing is you sit there and you may not, if you got good vocalists up there that aren't pulling off the mics, and some are better than others. Okay, sometimes you don't have to do much, but then right in the middle of this whole thing, the air conditioning unit kicks in. Okay, so you see all these vents in the room there. When those air conditioner kicks in, all of a sudden you get this low blowing rumble. Okay, and the people right under those vents can't hear anymore. Okay, then you got to adjust. Okay, the point I'm trying to say is you can't just set your volume control in practice and then sit back and fold your arms the rest of the day, because the environment changes. The people that's singing changes. The vocalists change. The things like environmental control kicks in. A truck might drive by. All of a sudden they might start doing construction work outside. A whole myriad of things could happen while you're in the mix. Okay, and then you have to adjust while you're in the mix. Okay, so that's what you gotta keep in mind as you do this. Okay, so as next time you get on the board, keep those things in mind as you do volume control.